One of the things I've come to realize with aim, in particular when it comes to Overwatch and aiming, is that there are a ton of different aim styles that you can use, and all of them are viable. It just depends on your hero choice and the situation you find yourself in a particular matchup. Now, stylistically, Overwatch and the realistic shooters like Valorant, CSGO, Rainbow Six Siege, you can throw in Modern Warfare, probably being this type of line if this was like a Spectrum, and then maybe Apex is somewhere over here. They have aspects of both, but they're definitely more on this side. Now, the reason why stylistically the aim is different in Overwatch and in those realistic shooters really comes down to the game's way of rewarding or punishing you. And so in those realistic shooters, they reward you for the stagnant playstyle because the time to kill is so low. And I mean, there's a ton of other factors on top of that. But really, the risk of dying is so high in those games. And if you die, well, then that's it for your round. But it's all about this like crosshair discipline, slowly peeking so that you cover every angle, cover your bases. And one of the cardinal sins is that if you over peek and overshoot the corner, well, then you expose yourself to this guy right here. And in those games, like I mentioned, the time to kill is so low where you can just take one bullet into the head and that's it for your game. As for Overwatch, the thing that it rewards you the most for is movement. Whereas the realistic shooters, you actually get punished for moving while aiming. Because if you start moving in those games, your accuracy will decrease or your spread will increase. Whereas Overwatch, I can strafe all day and all night and nothing ever happens to my spread until I actually start shooting. As you can see there. And that's not even true for every hero. Some heroes are pinpoint regardless, and other heroes have a slight recoil pattern, but it's practically linear. But I'm actually glad that there isn't any crazy recoil pattern that I have to memorize in this game, because strafing has its own set of problems, and Overwatch's strafing is a little bit whack because there's no movement acceleration, and the hitboxes can be manipulated quite effectively to really mess up your enemy's shot. But the issue with strafing really comes from this. If I leave my mouse unattended and I'm not moving my crosshair whatsoever, and I'm just using my movement keys, you'll notice that my crosshair gets periodically on the target, then off the target, on the target, off the target, on the target, off the target, right? And so what this means is that in order for me to keep my crosshair on the target, I have to counteract that with my mouse or with your right thumbstick. It doesn't really matter, right? As you can see here. But if you're strafing so hard and you're strafing in a random pattern where you don't know where you're strafing to, and I'm just pressing random buttons at this point, well, you can see that my crosshair kind of just jerks away and I overshoot, or sometimes I undershoot, and that's not really good. And then you multiply that with an enemy who also does the exact same thing, and it gets really difficult to try and track people when you're moving left and right. Of course, I'm used to it at this point. But there are instances where I just, like, for the life of me, I can't hit this tracer. Because sometimes the movement... Oh my. But this is exactly where these different aim techniques come into play, because with the variety of heroes in the game that require different sets of skills and just the different matchups for, let's say, a projectile here against a tracer, you're going to need those different aim techniques to actually improve your accuracy so you can hit more shots. Now, the first aim technique is something you may have heard before. It's called flicking, and flicking works entirely off of reaction. And how it works is you've got your crosshair, which your brain uses as an origin point to then measure the distance from your crosshair to the enemy, and from there it judges when you need to click as well. So you can do it a couple of different ways. You can try and stop your crosshair on the enemy, or you can try and flick through, and then it's more about the timing of when you shoot, right? So I overflick there, but it still works out. Here's the trick that I want to share for you guys. So we know that strafing is going to be incredibly hard to pull off these flick shots, because we know that sometimes you'll overflick if you don't know where you're strafing to. And so for heroes like a Cassidy, an Ashe, and Hanzo, those single fire targets, or shots, I guess you would say, you want to try and elongate your strafe strides so that it makes it easier for your brain to figure out where you're going in the first place. So if I slow it down like this, and I can try and match the movement of the Zen, that'll make it way easier for me to make that initial flick. As a continuation of the flick shot, we've got the micro flick shot. Now with flick shots, the difficulty is that you need to have great muscle memory and timing and all that sort of stuff in order to go from stop following me, to go from here to flick over to your target who's way over there. Of course I do it because I'm awesome. but I can't consistently do that. But if you do something like this, the two-step flick shot is how I would like to describe it, is that you would flick to the target and then you do a micro flick, something like that, right? So I'm starting over here. I do a general flick shot to get onto the target, and then I do a micro flick afterwards. This is the best way to illustrate my point here. If we've got an enemy over here, little stick figure, and we've got a crosshair, which is green, I'll try and keep it head level, something like that. The issue with these long flicks is that angles really show themselves over distance. So if this was the perfect flick, something like that, right? Point A to point B, right onto the target. But we, as humans, all know that we make mistakes. And even a 2 to 5 degree change of that means that we're going to completely whiff our target, right? That angle is really acute, as they would say in geometry. But if we pair that to this two-step method, and I'm going to draw the stick figure over here. So what we do is that we take our crosshair, that's not the green, we take our crosshair and we move it so that it's in the general vicinity of the enemy. I'm just going to put a headshot level as well. So we move it so that it's in general shot of the enemy. Well, now we have more room for error because the angles don't really matter, and there's a lot of hitbox forgiveness. We're not aiming for one point, we're aiming for the hitbox, which is pretty large. And so the forgiveness is that we can aim perfectly here, but even like a 5, 10, 20 degree angle doesn't really matter because we're so close to the enemy. Like, you see how much different that angle is compared to the one above? So that's the value of this two-step method. Another aim technique is the drag shot, and the drag shot is by definition a tracking flick shot, because how it works is that you first want to try and track your target. So they're moving left, they're moving right, whatever it may be. And so your aim will gradually increase, kind of like a crescendo. You would go from left to right, but as you're doing it, you increase your velocity. And so it would kind of look something like this, where you kind of drag your crosshair, and it's more about when you release rather than the position that your crosshair is taking. You're not looking for that perfect look onto them, because while you're tracking, it's relatively slow. It's almost like a variation of the two-step method with the microflick, like I was describing, right? So you go here and then you slowly wind up until you get to the target, and then you flick. And what I really value about the drag shot is for projectile heroes, especially for Hanzo, because with the slight lag of your crosshair moving in one direction, you're going to release, but there's going to be a few pixels where you're going to kind of correct that a little bit. And so you will hit that target a lot of the times with projectile heroes. Even Mei, who has like a cast time, the issue with a Mei is that her icicles have a charge up time. And so you can't just like control when you release. It's more about click. Okay, now I have to do my drag shot now. Drag shot now. Drag shot now. Drag shot now. The last technique I'm going to be talking about is tracking, specifically AD tracking, or using your movement keys to help you track. Now, the fatal error with tracking is that you still have control of your Y variable. And if you're tracking someone, such as this, there's an issue where you might lose sight of the head level, right? So if you, for some reason, start to sway up, or maybe you aim a little bit low, you're going to miss a headshot. And that's not what you want for a lot of heroes like Soldier, like Hanzo again, Ash. Those are all heroes that value this AD tracking so that they can keep their crosshair at head level and not worry about the Y value. And actually, you can kind of teach a little bit of trigger discipline here too, where you can track the target, and whenever they strafe outside of your crosshairs, then you let go until you get them back into your crosshairs again. Now, I don't have a bot up here, so you're going to have to use your imagination. But this AD tracking really helps for elevated surfaces, because if you're ever trying to track someone over here, your aim moves around a sphere. It swivels on a sphere. You have like a little ring around you, right? So whenever you're aim all the way up, when you move your mouse from left to right, you actually just spin in circle. And then you get less of that fact the more your angle decreases, until you're finally just at like normal level where it feels like, no, I'm just looking left and right. So if I were to only use my mouse here, then what happens is I have to control my mouse, and actually when I'm looking left and right, I have to decrease or move my mouse slightly downward in order to compensate because we're moving at this like ring over here. Even though this is a flat surface, if I move left to right, I have to actually diagonally drop my mouse downwards, which then you can kind of get this variation where your crosshair isn't at head level anymore. So on these elevated surfaces, yet again, if you just keep AD strafing such as this, you can imagine a Hanzo just trying to shoot up here. Well, he's just waiting for the enemy to get into his crosshairs before he shoots. Or, you know, because it is projectile, you're just watching the movement and then you have to predict when he's going to walk into your crosshairs, right? That's everything I have for you guys. If you want to see more Overwatch content, you can be sure to check out my channel. I'm also taking VODs once again, so if you want to submit your own VOD for me to review, you can do so by checking out my Discord server, link down in the description, and there will be a place for you to submit your VODs. But until then, I'll see you when I see you. Peace.
Yeah.